We're going to be starting with Marvin Cohen, who is sitting right here. His writing has appeared in every issue of Exacting Clam, and he's published 8 books with Sagging Meniscus. He has a total of 17 books currently in print, and there are more in the offing. Douglas Glover said of his work, over and over, the awestruck reader inwardly exclaims, "Good Lord, you can really do that with a sentence." Marvin released 2 books this year, Trying to Fool Death, or One Thing After Another, from Tough Poets Press, and How Upon Reflection to Be Amorous, from Sagging Meniscus. So, here's Marvin.
I hold this, right?
Sure, you can do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just read 2 poems and talk in between. Here's a portrait of a sponge, which is often noticed in the bar. As a parasite, I'm greedy for everything within sight. I hope others' generosity will align. In case I owe a debt, somehow I forget, to my eternal regret, making the other upset. Wherever I leave my calling card, it's always the first thing others discard. Never to give, but always to take, is my motto for my own sake. With pals in a bar, I go very far. When it's my turn to pay for a round, by coincidence, I'm somehow never found. Is this a trick or is it profound? When it's time for anyone else to pay, they find to their dismay I'm always there to get my share, since it's only fair what they can bear. From me, folks expect nothing. To me, I expect everything as the epitome of greed, irrespective of my need. To that, we're all agreed. All I want to do is get. If I don't, let others share my regret, and still say, we're well met. Society is full of give and take. For the latter, I'm always on the make. So no wonder I'm a parasite, of whom others can't bear the sight. At least it doesn't come to a fight for rowdy people to test their might. If it does, I'm the first to take flight. It's at the end of the first page.
Rather than hold it, I think you can just
Yeah.
let it hold itself.
Nothing true about this, by the way. Okay. Okay.
Make sure he doesn't trip on it between his legs. Okay.
My darling Candace has died. I dreamed of her and cried. She said, "Hello, bud." I'm still in a state of stun. She was miserable from her lung disease, which was to lead to her decease. All that we had shared when we were paired, of trips and friends and places where we could see each other's faces. We had intended to review, as if miraculously to renew. I knew her right down to her core and was ready to remember more, but she could no longer function when the pain punctured her sleep. All I could do was silently weep when her darling light she couldn't manage to keep. I start to think of her current state, to divide horribly our joint fate. When that cute little thing was my mate, she took care of me with money as my protective honey. Why can't we continue to hug in my old role as her loving love? When we matched up our genders and aligned their respective splendors before they only became sorrowful lenders. So that's a real story. Here's one more, and then I promise to leave. Avoid dying, or your relatives will be crying. There's nothing more stupid than to die, so don't even try. The disadvantages are high. Keep yourself family alive in order to thrive, so you'll be sure to survive. Make living a priority with your foremost authority as your own life guide. You don't need my advice that dying is dumb, to be precise. There's no choice in this matter, so don't give me any more blather. I'll completely shut up if you'd rather. Talking about death is in bad taste, since death is notorious for life's waste when it operates with too much haste. I wonder on what death is really based. But that's a little bit more thing. So you don't have to worry about it now or recently. So anyway, so that's the end.
Next up is Joshua Kornreich. He's the author of 5 books of fiction, including the novels Kavanaugh, Horse Buggy, Naughty Naughty Naughty, The Boy Who Killed Caterpillars. His most recent book is Shakespeare in the Dark, a novelette. He lives in New York. He's here.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. So this is the opening pages. This fiction is the opening pages of the longer work that I'm tinkering with. The longer work is called Munder, and this excerpt I've given the title "Boy with Racket." So here it is. He had watched it patch from the wall, just as his master had instructed. It was a leg, a child's leg, bruised and bloody, pendulant and pustulant, exposed from the mid-thigh on down. Munder did not tell him whose leg it was, and the boy did not dare to ask. Munder. How the boy came to know that the wall's name was Munder is something the boy could not recollect. He nudged the leg with the tip of his wooden racket, but the leg did not respond. But why would it respond? It was just a leg, thought the boy. A leg whose owner was surely no longer alive, let alone attached to it. I am its owner now, said Munder. Munder could hear all the boy's thoughts, for Munder had already become the owner of those as well. Whenever the leg twitched or flailed, the boy knew that Munder was listening. This twitching and flailing, it made the boy wonder, had Munder always been the name of the wall, or had Munder been the name of the child whose leg now dangled right in front of his face? Or was Munder the name of the leg itself? Perhaps the wall was simply a medium through which the child or the child's leg was able to communicate. Munder offered him no clues on the matter. and the boy did not dare to ask any questions about it, for the boy knew that answering questions was not something Munder took pleasure in, and the boy did not wish to make Munder angry. "Do not make me angry," Munder would sometimes say, and the boy would nod his head. "Take your racket and strike your ball against my bricks," Munder would say, and the boy would back away from the wall with his wooden racket in one hand and his rubber ball in the other, and scurry across the pavement toward where the tall bushes stood along the outer rim of the parking lot. "Do not go into the bushes," Munder would say, and the boy would never go into the bushes, and he would never ask why, even though he was deeply curious as to why. Nevertheless, if he were to hit the ball against the wall that formed the back of the grocery store, where the old bowling alley used to be, and that ball were to roll or bounce past him and into the bushes, the boy would not dare go into the bushes to retrieve the ball for fear of angering Munder. Whenever one of his rubber balls landed in the woods, the boy would pick out a new one from the basket attached to the front of his two-wheeler that was parked on its kickstand at the corner of the parking lot and play on. Some balls were red, some were blue, some were pink, some were beige. When all the balls from the basket disappeared into the giant bushes, the boy would get up on his two-wheeler and pedal on home, before pedaling all the way back to the parking lot with a new basket full of rubber balls. The boy had loads of rubber balls from home that he had used for playing fetch with a dog he called Boy, until this dog he called Boy was made into something different by the spinning wheels of a speeding car on a long stretch of dirt and rock that he and his neighbors called road. After he buried Boy under the patch of dirt behind the small unfinished structure of wood and stone he called house, the boy had all the rubber balls to himself. All of them, that is, except for one, an orange one, which was Boy's favorite, and was the very rubber ball Boy had chased down the road before it was made into something different. There were bite marks on each and every rubber ball, but none of the bite marks were as deep as the ones found on the orange ball that had been buried under a patch of dirt the boy called backyard, next to the brown and white dog the boy called Boy. After the burial of Boy and Boy's favorite ball, never again would the boy pick up one of the rubber balls without thinking of Boy, or the word Boy, or how Boy looked after it was crushed under the wheels of the speeding car. It was brown and beige, remembered the boy. There was brown and beige and pink and purple, and it was frothy, and now the boy spent his days hitting those very same rubber balls against a brick wall with an old wooden racket whose grip was worn to the core. He was always on the lookout for truant officers, but no truant officer ever came. So the boy kept on with his hitting. Topspin forehands. Oops. Topspin forehands. One-handed backhands. Two-handed backhands. The boy was a natural. "You are a natural," Munder would say, and the boy would nod his head to the center of the wall, where the child's leg hung down from it, as if the leg were Munder's face, or Munder's mouth, perhaps even Munder's tongue. Maybe it really is Munder's tongue, thought the boy. Maybe Munder uses the leg like a tongue for speaking and tasting. For tasting what, though? Munder had no response to this line of thought, and sometimes the boy wondered if his master could truly hear all his thoughts, or if some thoughts managed to slip out of range somehow. While this perplexed the boy a bit, it never distracted him from the task at hand, striking the ball against Munder's bricks over and over again, just as Munder desired. The shoppers, they never distracted the boy either. As they walked to and from the grocery store, some of the shoppers would sometimes nod at the boy. They would nod and pass by the boy, as the boy would put his duties on pause and allow them to pass. And the boy would listen to the sound of them passing, their car keys jingling inside their pockets or twirling around their fingers, their mouths making the whistling melodies that only mouths can make when the air outside is fresh and the sunlight is warm but not too hot. The boy would nod his boy head back at these shoppers with their car keys and then look back at the cars that they left behind. Sometimes the cars had a small child inside them, or even a pet dog. The windows of these cars would sometimes be rolled up, but other times these shoppers who passed by the boy these grown-up shoppers, as they were, they would leave all the windows rolled down, or at least one of the windows would be down, especially if the day was a particularly hot one. But even when the windows were all rolled down, the shoppers would still always lock all their car doors. The shoppers would never tell the boy that all their car doors were locked, at least not with their mouths would they tell him. Nor would they ever tell the boy with their mouths that the car they were locking had a small child or a pet dog inside them. No, not with their mouths would they tell any of this to the boy. Instead, they would tell him with their keys. Their car keys would always do the telling, not their mouths. These shoppers with their cars, they would pass by the boy and nod at him. The boy always nodding back at them, just as Munder had always instructed. And as they would approach him, and as they whistled past him, and as their keychains jingled about them, they would tell him what needed to be told with their car keys. With the beep of their keys, that is. With just the beep of their keys, they would tell the boy, "See our cars over there? See them parked in their parking spots over there? See how each of our cars has 2 doors on them, or 4 doors on them, with 1 or 2 on each side of them? Well, those doors on either side, they are locked, each and every one of them. So don't try anything funny, you hear? You leave my child or my dog alone, you hear? See that child in the back seat? See that dog in the back seat? See that dog in the lap of that child in the back seat? Well, that's my child, you hear? That's my dog, you hear? So you better stay away from my car or else." That is what their car keys told him. Or rather, that is what the beep of their car keys told him. Stay away from my cars or else. That is what the beep of their car keys always told him. The shoppers, they would nod at the boy, then beep their keys, then whistle with their whistling mouths, and then be on their way around the back of the building, to the front where the old bowling alley used to be, and to where the automated doors of the grocery store were always there waiting for them. As soon as these shoppers were out of sight, the boy would carry on with his duties, striking his rubber ball against the wall over and over again, just as Munder had desired. If there was a child or a dog inside any car left behind, the boy would pay them no mind, other than to entertain the fantasy of their being entertained by his duties, a captive audience in the truest sense. He imagined them sitting on the edge of their back seats, admiring his every stroke, his graceful form, his tireless grit, his persistent hustle, his consistent readiness. At times, there was no amount of imagination necessary. They would, on occasion, cheer or bark their approval from behind the open window from which they sat. That is, if the back window of the car in which they sat was, in fact, rolled down. On other occasions, they would cheer against the boy. "Oh, man, you suck," said one child from inside the car after one measly mishit from the boy. The boy glared at the child upon hearing this, but Munder would not have it. "Pay the child no mind," said Munder to the inside of the boy's boy head. "Carry on with your duties." And carry on the boy did, despite the child continuing to taunt him. He imagined the ball he was striking was a smirking face of the child heckling him. And while he did wonder if Munder ever got wind of this vengeful line of thinking, Munder never acknowledged it. But the boy would continue to wonder, how come no one, neither child nor dog from inside any car, nor any shopper going to and from the grocery store, ever seemed to notice the little leg hanging out from the center of the wall? And was the leg in fact hanging out from the wall, or was it now being sucked into the wall from the inside? He knew Munder must have gotten wind of this rumination, because the leg seemed to twitch a bit in acknowledgement, but still, no perceptible explanation from Munder was forthcoming. Because they were too old to see, thought the boy. The grown-up shoppers, they were too old and too far away from the wall to see the child's leg hanging down from the center with their own aging eyes. But what about when there was a child inside the car? Or what about when there was a dog inside the car? How come no child or dog ever seemed to take notice of the leg? How come no dog ever barked at it? How come no child ever pointed a finger at it? Even the child who heckled the boy, even that child did not point any finger at the wall or what was hanging out from it. The only finger that child ever pointed was the middle finger now and then, pointed upward and straight at the boy. Sometimes the boy imagined Munder finally yielding to the boy's curiosity. "I allow only you to see it," he imagined Munder saying. I allow only you to see it because you are special. You are special, and that is why I have chosen you and no one else to fulfill these duties I have asked of you. I chose you because you are a natural. But Munder never yielded to the boy's curiosity, and the boy knew Munder never would yield either. Whenever the shoppers came back to the back of the building from the front of the grocery store, they always came back with shopping carts full of groceries. The wheels of the carts would jingle and jangle over the pavement of the parking lot, and it was often difficult for the boy to distinguish what was causing the jiggling and jangling. Was it the steel cages of the carts, or the keychains inside the pockets of the shoppers? As the shoppers would whiz and whistle past the boy, who would always put his duties on pause to allow them to pass in either direction. The shoppers would nod at the boy, and the boy would nod back. The nod, the boy knew, was the way the shoppers told him with their heads that they appreciated his putting his duties on pause and letting them pass through. The boy also knew that the nod was the way the shoppers told him with their heads that they appreciated his staying away from their cars and from the child or dog inside their cars, that there was, in fact, a child or dog to be found inside of them. These shoppers, returning from their grocery shopping, they would pass by the boy, nod their heads as they passed, and when they reached their cars, they would hold out their car keys, and as these car keys were held out, they would beep. That beep was not for him, the boy knew, but for the child or the dog inside the car who had been waiting the arrival of their caregiver. That was the way the shoppers told the child or the dog inside the car, or even the car itself, that the shopper had returned and that they were now safe. Safe from the heat building inside the car, safe from the boy loitering about the parking lot, safe from anyone passing through that parking lot who was not the owner of the car. Once their bags of groceries were all passed into their cars, all placed into their cars, in the trunk of the car, in the back seat, in the front seat, the shoppers would push the carts to the back part of the building where all the used carts were kept, or they would just leave the carts where they stood, next to the parking spot in which their car was parked. As the shoppers drove off with the cars, the boy would see the windows roll up as they passed, or when they were not rolled up, the boy would hear the mouths of the shoppers still making the whistling sounds only a whistling mouth can make when the air outside is fresh and the sunlight is warm but not too hot. Or perhaps it was the wall that was making the whistling sound with the leg. That was Munder's mouth. It was hard sometimes for the boy to know which whistling sound was which, but he always made sure to nod at the wall just the same. Proceed with your duties, Munder would say, and proceed the boy would. Forehand, then backhand, backhand, then forehand. Shoelaces ticking against the wall, the legs swaying on his tendonous pendulum. A metronome in the wind, death's only clock. Thank you.
Extracted from Anne Radcliffe's The Mysteries of Udolpho, which was one of the first Gothic novels. If you know the technique erasure, this is a somewhat more evolved version of an erasure. It has more rules in it. I'm very interested in what writers don't know that they know when they're writing. And Anne Radcliffe seemed to have had a lot on her mind besides the story she was writing when she wrote the story. A lot of it has to do with abolition, what was going on in the Caribbean at the end of the 18th century with the slave revolutions in Haiti and Jamaica. And so I have extracted this hidden text, and then I interspersed it with contemporary images and also contemporary documents, quotations from contemporary documents. So one of the characters that emerges early in the book is the planter aristocrat. Pastimes of the planter aristocrat. Little basket of scenes, abstract sauntering enthusiast, of bosom, of repast, of rocks adjoining room. Books exercise taste, building beauty, a fabric remembered, building taste, conspicuous in manners, made windows and palm trees, enriched modern grove towards caught landscape, precipices scarce amongst feast pursuits. At night, Mr. Cope came, slept here, had little member, but suspect he has the plaque. In the evening, called little member a Creole. Super lectum in meo domo parlor. Let Mr. Parkinson, The Economy of Love, a poem, said we wrote by Armstrong, a Scotsman. Mr. Parsons praises Tom Jones, said to be wrote by Fielding. Joseph Andrews, by Fielding's sister. From Thomas Thistlewood, Diary, May 1759. The climate of figure, adjusted chateau, was excellent story, was tasteful, yet sacrificed prospect that wept, a plantation. Palm trees, a river, fine setting sun, distant gray children, ever simplicity, tumultuous heart experienced, nothing more, placid, favorite hour, dark hour, often pastoral, often legal. His favorite slave. Uncommon benevolence advanced her object. Congenial penetration dangerous to self-command. He instructed passions with obliged indifference. Occasioned her eyes, awakened her eye contagious, her sciences, her might, every early inclination against ever-escaped thinking, gratifications necessary, indolence beautiful, dissipation interest. Was it? This morning, old Tom Williams called and made his observations as usual. He once killed a Negro girl of his own and got looseness, slapping her ass with a corn stick. And one of the girls cleaning the hall, when he thought it did not much want it, he shit in it and told her there was something for her to clean. Frequently at home wears nothing but a shirt and fans himself with a forelock before his daughter, etc., etc. From Thomas Thistlewood's Diary, Thursday, March 19, 1752. Wild silence, impressed scenes faded, were woods of circumstances, her little glen, moon screened, eye shattered by emerging vine covered. Gust of accents from trembled excursions, sonnet to go, steps, Allah, sweet lightning portrait, Allah, conceal away, lines to being compelled, painful, she to presume, away thoughts, exercise, indisposition fevered, a recovery advance, air provisions, no torture. As Sally steals everything left in the cookroom and eats it if eatable, Fibba had her tied with her hands behind her naked for the mosquitoes to bite her tonight. She bawled out lustily, but before 9 o'clock in the evening broke loose and ran away. I got up, and all hands went to seek her. I catched her near the rock holes in Ditto provision ground. Her hands were tied up so tight that the string hurt her very much. Brought her home and secured her for this night in the bilboes. About 9 in the evening, cum sali mea super terram in Marco provision ground. Thomas Desolate Diary, Tuesday, August 7th, 1770. Tacking between master and mistress. Botanizing gratitude gave Monsieur pleasure. Confinement conceptions of every shade. The sensible romantic, with daughter degree, could himself forbear secretly. Regret, useless, the surprised instrument, to temper her silence, her person, timidity of weather. She entered faltering to Madame her wherefore, only apprehensions, faint wainscot tremor, now added doubt, Monsieur of palm trees, of delicacy, much detained, sales of unpleasing, alas, ever recollected. Long lost, her resemblance really became absence, informed, unreasonable, music, disappearance. Set all the blackies scraping clean all around the house, the lawn, etc. Treated them with beef and punch, and never was there a happier set of people than they appeared to be. All day long they have been singing odd songs, only interrupted by peals of laughter, and indeed, I must say, they have reason to be content, for they have many comforts and enjoyments. I only wish the poor Irish were half as well off. Had a visit and a good long conversation with Mr. Ward today. From Lady Nugent's journal of her residence in Jamaica in 1801-1805, January 23rd, 1802. A lady from Europe. Saying Monsieur readily expressed contempt, concealed resentment, restrained resentment, understood his heiress, woman determined not to display intelligence, listened for ladder, permitted auscultation, and negotiating of class, importance, not opinions, nor what Madame could, describing banquet, honor with minuteness, fancy, heightened happiness. The carriages were sent to Port Henderson for some Navy men. We had 20 at breakfast and at dinner in addition to our party. Much talk about peace, some pleased, some the reverse. I am of the contented party and went to dress in great spirits for the grand ball given me tonight by the council, etc., and put on my smartest dress with a gold tiara and white feathers and made myself look as magnificent as I could. At 8 was received at the entrance of the House of Records by the members of the council, some of the assembly, and some military. Was conducted to a sort of throne covered with pink silk and draperies festooned with flowers. The decorations of the room seemed beautiful, and the supper was superb. One dish I shall never forget. It was a roasted peacock placed before me with all the feathers of the tail stuck in, and spread so naturally that I expected every minute to see him strut out of the dish. Danced myself almost to death to please both civil and military, army and navy, and stayed till 1 o'clock. The Lady Nugent's journal for residence in Jamaica from 1801 to 1805, November 25th, 1801. I sigh for politics, or I exist, where conscious. I know improvements. I bring inquiry. Should I number servants people? Accommodated? Improved? Since living at Chateau? Sir, apropos some possession improvements, I hear mentioned difficulty of deferred hope. In the morning, a carpenter from Spanish Town applied to General Nugent to respite a slave sentenced to be hanged tomorrow. The law of the land is, it seems, that 3 magistrates may condemn a slave to death. This case was that 2 slaves, one an old offender, the other a boy of 16, robbed a man of his watch, etc. The old man showed the boy how to get in at the window and gave him all his instructions, while he remained on the outside and received the things stolen. The old man has been condemned to hard labor, and the boy to be hanged. General Nugent made every exertion, but in vain, to save the life of the boy and send him out of the country. But it appears that it could not be done without exercising his prerogative very far and giving great offense and alarm to the white population. This law of the 3 magistrates appears to me abominable, but I am too little versed in such matters to do more than feel for the poor sufferer. Lady Nugent's Journal, January 10th, 1882. Cut the should sign, hollow enthusiasm.
Don Raffel's most recent book is Boundless as the Skies, right here, from Sagging Meniscus. The previous books are The Strange Case of Dr. Cooney, The Secret Life of Objects, Further Adventures in the Restless Universe, Carrying the Body, and In the Year of Long Division.
I'm much shorter than you. Let's see how this goes. How's this? I'm going to read 2 very short things. The first of which is from Boundless as the Sky. In this book, I'm very interested in sideshows and sideshow performers. In this book, the heart of it is the 1933 Chicago World's Fair, The Century of Progress. And there's a novella in the book that takes place on a single day in 1933 where it follows some of the people who happen to be at the fair that day. And this one is a little bit of a chapter. It's a sideshow performer. Many of the sideshow performers at that time had been plucked from institutions where they were basically had been incarcerated. And showmen like Ripley would just go shopping for freaks. And this woman, this character, is based on Cuckoo, the bird girl, whose real name was Minnie Woolsey. And she was very nearly blind, and she had kind of a bird-like stature. And she was actually quite famous in her day. So for the purposes of this fictional piece, she is Dodo, the bird girl, formerly the blind girl from Mars, formerly a ward of the great state of Georgia, formerly the daughter of someone, but who knows who. She feels herself fly in the first few moments of waking, the wind on her face, her thin limbs, her few tufts of hair, as if the sky can hold her, lift her, carry her, and love her as nobody does. She has never seen herself, her reflection. And why would she need to? People have said what she looks like all her life. The world is light and form and shadow, a little bit of color, the warmth of the sun, the relief of the rain, the sweet and salty taste of food. Her face, she is told, is enough like a bird's that people will pay good money to look. She has learned how to dress in a costume of feathers, how to strut and how to cluck, so they will laugh and then clap and then come back again and bring friends. Still, she doesn't mind it too much, not like the place where she came from, with no light of day and no one to talk to and no one to listen, just everyday moaning and screaming down the hall, and hunger from nothing to eat but mush, and some of it rancid, and her arms tied down and her body cut open so she'd never have a baby. the man in the night who did what he wanted, crushing her limbs, spilling her blood, spitting out names she will not repeat, not even in her mind. All of them believed she was incapable of speech because she never spoke in there. She wanted to die. And then she was summoned, taken. His voice was smooth. He had observed her, he said, and he had chosen her. She was worth money. He taught her what to do. First, as the blind girl from Mars, and when that didn't sell, the bird. You understand me, don't you? He said. I'll bet you can talk if you want to. Call me Mr. R. There are others like her, plucked from asylums or rented from parents, but no one, he tells her, is just like her, and that is good. It is beautiful. Freaks, says Mr. R, are the royalty of sideshows, rarer, of greater value than people who do things, swallow a flame, toot a horn with their ear. You are special just for being you. They travel as a family, eat at a table. Mr. R makes arrangements and pays them cash, which she hides, with nowhere to spend it, no idea how. Here is what she likes. Mr. R never touches her. He sees she eats decent, even with just the 2 teeth she has left, and both of them lose. Soups, sweet cream. And now, in this town of Chicago, this summer, there is a man. He is new. He is double her size, who opens his mouth and plunges a sword down his throat to his gullet, and doesn't choke or cut himself. Nick blades. He talks to her sometimes, touches her arm but doesn't hurt her, steadies her. Words stick in her mouth from years of disuse. They slur without teeth. They coat her tongue, but he is willing to wait. And this is a snippet of something I would call new work if I hadn't been crapping around with it for years on end. But I have a thing about elephants. They often appear in my books. And this is another elephant, and it is very specifically Topsy, the elephant who was executed on Coney Island, if you're aware of that horrific story at the very beginning of the 20th century. You heard only the trumpet, or did you hear the rumble, or possibly the sound you called snort? Snort. You heard what you wanted, didn't you? You felled trees to make cages, tortured what riches lay in the earth to make chains and nails. You made us do tricks. You thought you could name us. Topsy, you said. Tip and Little Hip and Giant Bolivar. Jumbo, the doomed light of Asia. Alice, the professional widow. Mary, beast. It is true that I killed, that I throttled a man. I would do it again. I would listen to the hum beyond your puny apprehension. Perhaps you were a witness to my death. It was winter. Were you cold? Did you perch on a fence? The one you called Thomas, that souring genius, would have liked to upstage me. Electrical current enough to fell an elephant. True, in fact. Recorded on film for your edification. There in the crowd stood Fred. Meal of root meat seasoned with poison. The throwing of the switch, the boiling of the blood, singed heart. My foot severed to make a stand for an umbrella, as if the rain would kill you. Freddie the showman would later say it was Jumbo's, but no, the foot was mine. My skull was left whole in the dirt, with no one to crush it, releasing me. So here I am, still. Who will shatter my bones? Who will hear me this time? Will it ever be you?
Awesome, man.
Hi, everybody. Part 2. We're starting with James Damis. James Damis lives in New Jersey with his wife and daughter, works in New York City. His novella Dupes and Liars in the Lost Shore Town can be found in the fall 22 issue of Blaze Fonts. Another novella, Filial Sojourn, is scheduled for publication in early 25 by Running Wild Press, and his novel Zeke Borchelak is going to be published by Sagging Meniscus in December 24. He was born in Hoboken, and his favorite fruit is oranges.
Thank you. I needed a little filler there for my resume, so I went with the oranges. So anyway, I just want to give you a little backstory here, so you know where this novel is coming from. It's a story of a man on a journey to find meaning and fulfillment in a life spent helping people. But through a series of strange and tumultuous adventures, everything he seems to wind up doing is toward the opposite effect. It's set in a kind of a cracked skew of time, 19th century, but it kind of exists unto itself. It's like sort of a lost, dark world. And this is from the first chapter, when he's in this dark, depraved wharf town called Bloodenville, and he obtains a berth on a fishing trawler, and it goes badly, and he goes overboard, and he finds himself in the netting of another fishing trawler. So he's hauled in with the fish, and it's a foreign vessel with a strange crew. So he tries to hide in in a hollowed head of a halibut. But they see him as a mystical fish creature who becomes their talisman. And on board he meets an older man they call Pumis, who had been pulled from the sea years earlier and became their shaman-like figure for his own survival. He counsels Zeke there that there's no way out, basically, and that other than going overboard, and so he better start honing his act as the fishhead fellow pronto. The fishermen began stirring on deck, preparing the nets and windlasses and capstans, climbing the mizzenmast and readying the topsails, greeting their strange new shipmate with incomprehensible salutations. And Zeke pondered his predicament and saw his sentence in that moment, trapped among them as an ocean creature they caught, mystical and providential, a fishhead freak of a talisman, tasked with the tall order of amusing, edifying, and inspiring them. But old Pumis, knowing his new partner meant less of a shaman-like load for him, had him over a barrel, and Zeke began later that morning staging his first play, in which he had portrayed a kind but naive flounder who discovers fishing as a hobby and catches his father and devours him sauteed with lemon and chives before realizing his crime. Floundering with belly full of poor papa was the showstopper he slapped together, which smoothly segued into a free verse uncompromising poem, Fish Sticks in the Crawl Space, Half Cooked, and the lugubrious ballad, A Pace Moulders a Moon Pie. He worked up some peppy nautical numbers too, Sousa-inspired, pure Baroque celebratory sounds sung with reckless abandon, and the ship's bassoonist and ukulele strummer provided instrumental interludes when the transported fishhead fellow marched about in his signature high-stepping, spasmodic improvisation. The fishermen, unable to comprehend the content of Zeke's performance, were nonetheless transfixed by the raw spectacle of the fishhead fellow, hearkening some screwball compulsion to plumb deeply within and find expression for an unholy, unhinged melange of mindless conceit and self-abasement. Zeke established a routine of 3 shows a day, one shortly after daybreak, matins he called the opener, early afternoon, Sunnyside Skidoo, and one in the evening, vespers. A gratifying but punishing load of work, made all the more grueling by his halibut head emitting an increasingly foul odor from the rotting fish interior. The fishermen were usually working while he was performing, which integrated Zeke into their arduous mission to catch more fish, and the strange finned figure preternaturally drew their interest and attention and cooperation. The fish character was developing exponentially through these early live shows, and Zeke truly lost himself in concocting clever new ideas. The fish-head fellow he created sustaining his very will to endure. He fretted that he, like Pumas, might become slowly usurped and taken over by the panicky hybrid sea creature he'd come to grudgingly respect, while growing more and more uneasy inhabiting. After several weeks, the freshness of his act began to wane, and the fishermen hardly paused to take note of their resident performer anymore. Though the few times Zeke stopped in the middle of a show, the men were very quickly went into a violent uproar, and in a flash their fish-head fellow was resuming his act. He grew melancholy, realizing that he'd been relegated to ambient noise, like the periodic ringing of church bells, so part of a town's landscape, only their silence would elicit a reaction. But Zeke Borchelak had a survivor's perseverance in him and thrived in his 3 daily shows, churning out plays almost effortlessly, such as Catfish Confidential, Mudflaps Mojo, and Monkfish Lasso Pasquinade, all searing examinations of the quiet lives of fish and their ongoing systematic slaughter, and veering into big, soaring operatic songs of lives torn apart by long fishing expeditions and the disasters befalling the men aboard who perish and leave wives and children behind. Quote, "The sea gives us life and swallows others in death, like Captain Schlugelpan, who tumbled into a roiling high tide, drunk and happy." The fishermen seemed to latch on to the mention of Schlugelpan in this song, and Zeke was amused by their pronunciation of his name, Kapashushapan. He could never forget the image of these odd, hard-nosed fishermen scampering higgledy-piggledy with impish grins, their billowing, silky genie pants reflecting the sun rays on the ocean's horizon, a few rarier ones slinging fresh-caught sole with their flashy sashes at one another's heads, all shrieking, "Kapashushapan!" and laughing, later on roistering over rum with an equally baffling joie de vivre. Zeke bore them no ill will. He rather enjoyed their uncommunicated company, the camaraderie among them, to which he was ineluctably alien. He found their arcane culture impenetrable and fascinating, and struck up an acquaintance with the captain, a rotund, large-eared chap with a croaking, incessant chuckle and a penchant for pounding the fish-head fellow, or as they called him, Schruga Flogesh, on the back as hard as he could. There too was a détente with Pumas, and they on occasion played pinochle in the galley, while downing rum, the optimism shared only weeks earlier, now gone in their grim resignation to the long voyage against their wills. Zeke knew he should have hated Pumas for coercing his participation in their ill-conceived drunken scheme, but he decided to eschew those obvious sentiments. It could have been worse than stuck on a ship, that ship he knew. But lying in his hard, too small bunk at night, Zeke thought of his life aboard that ship, hiding in a foul fish head, changed blessedly by filching a halibut now and then from a fresh haul, and honing performances from mysterious fishermen, not particularly invested in his form of live art. And he could never imagine his younger self, the 10-year-old Zeke Borchelak, dreaming of adventure and making his mark one day as an explorer or visionary or simply a bold, unconquerable man of the world. That boy, born to a pretty tavern wench and a lush hound liveryman, who ran wild in the stark countryside with his pack of loose lads doing as they pleased. He would take his chances jumping overboard rather than sticking to such a grimy grind out. Pumas would expatiate on the salutary need of adjusting one's expectations, the contentedness of yielding to resignation, of finding a new useful existence within the inevitable confinements of life's vagaries. The old man would affect the intellectual as he delivered such deadening words, stroking his beard, relighting his corn cob, twitching his noggin to twirl the putty pom-poms dangling from his fisherman's hat. Zeke swore he would never succumb to such constraints. He would never surrender the faint flickers of exultant, illimitable yearning that yet survived in his dormant soul, that nebulous notion to emerge as a substantial man of parts with skills and knowledge, and yes, the capability of great transcendent love with the right woman. He held on to that. He held onto that much lying in the darkness of his cold, cramped bunk at night as the ship rocked against waves, his fetid fish head on a shelf beside him. But this vestige of fortitude was waning every day as he went ever deeper into his fish head fellow performances, and his body ached with overworked exhaustion, and pustules and cankers sprouted on his face and neck from the halibut entrails, and his terrible puking resumed like a broken spigot, twisting him up. And then, one morning, at a daybreak, Zeke awakened in his bunk to hear the extraordinary sounds of people and horse hooves on cobblestone, and a kind of bustle that betokened something other than their vessel and the ocean. And he put on his fish head and scampered on deck and beheld the wondrous sights of a busy harbor where his dark ship had apparently docked. And just like that, in a straightforward manner, he never imagined his long, ungodly ordeal had come to a sudden end. He let out a glorious laugh as his chest heaved with heartfelt gratefulness, and he peered across the bow at the brisk commotion of the commerce pulsing along the wharves and the cobblestone streets and the old brick buildings, and felt all the exhilaration of knowing he had been granted a new life. Land once more would be under his feet. He searched for Pumas and found him in the forecastle, orating before a group of squatting fishermen in their guttural tongue, oscillating a length of hawser line with a bream and a moonfish dangling, incense smoke emanating from his tunic, now swinging the hawser line over the men's heads, as Zeke interrupted with a shout. "Pumas, we have docked in a harbor. Come with me, let's hurry and disembark from this godforsaken tug while we have a chance." Pumas completed his pagan maritime ritual and slowly turned to his comrade. "They will not let you, Borshalak. They will tie you up and torture you and throw you overboard tonight. Don't be a fool, it's over. There's no way out for us." The fishermen were conversing confusedly and watching Zeke closely before moving towards him. "You are a scared old man who gave up your freedom for this madness." He pulled off his fish head and threw it at Pumas and the fishermen and yelled at them, "Goodbye and go to hell, you bastards." And he ran across the deck as fishermen now saw he was a fake all that time, and they gave him chase, screaming in their infernal tongue, and very nearly caught him before Zeke leaped from the bow onto an old weather-beaten stretcher pier that trembled under his weight as he bolted over it and into the chaos of the crowd, losing his pursuers forever.
I'm just struck by how various the artists who are reading tonight are. And it's just wonderful. And next, David Winner is the author of 3 novels, The Cannibal of Guadalajara, Tyler's Last, and Enemy Combatant. His work has appeared in many publications, including Exacting Clam. He's the senior editor at Stat and Rec magazine, the fiction editor of The American, magazine based in Rome, frequent contributor to the Brooklyn Rail, columnist for Three Quarters Daily, and his most recent book is Master Lovers.
Thank you so much for coming. First thing I'm going to read is just 2 paragraphs from something my great aunt, my father's aunt, wrote when she was 16 in basically 1916. That was ended up being published in something called Romance magazine in the late 19-teens. In the little restaurants of the Montmartre, there are still artists who pause between drinks to talk of Paul Gauguin. Those were the thrilling days in the 90s when the red-bearded painter sent Paris into shuddering ecstasy over the primitive glory of his canvases. That was a man, all absinthe and women and paint, and the first is inspiration, the last is God. The women were numerous but incidental. Mon Dieu, how they adored him, head over heels in love with the pagan fire of his casual lovemaking. On the other side of the world, in the tropical isles of the South Seas, Gauguin is also a loved memory. There he fled from Paris to fragrant, sun-crowned Tahiti and the bleak coconut groves of the Marquesa Islands to paint and find peace of soul. And even now, when the cool blue of the evening has wiped out the crimson stains of the sunset, old native women whisper shining eyes of the great white artists who loved them when they were young and beautiful with flowers in their hair. So, so that was from a book. Sorry. Doralee, my great aunt who wrote that, wrote a book called Master Lovers of the World about Gauguin, Casanova, Henry VIII, Louis XIV. As I say, it was published in something called Romance Magazine in the teens. I'd like you to just know two other things about her. One, that she was a Jew. Two, that I knew nothing about her love life, any of her relationships, before she married my great uncle Dario, who was an Italian Jew from Rome in 1940. Let's see. I came across Master Lovers after Doralee's death in the summer of 2002, when my parents sold one of the two adjacent apartments in which she had lived since the 1940s. But I'd have to wait until 2010 when my father sold the second apartment to gain access to drawers and cubbies unopened for decades. On a sultry summer afternoon, I arrived at apartment 8C, rolled up my sleeves to begin the job of clearing things out, but napped instead on a fraying sofa across from a noisy old Friedrich air conditioner. Upon waking, I made myself a cup of dubious tea from an ancient tea bag and opened a filing cabinet, the top layer of which I'd explored before. Previously, I found a framed photo of Mick Jagger yucking up with Doralee at a party in the 80s. A typed note from Paul Bowles right under it invited Doralee to Tangiers. When she took him up on it, she tried his sheesh marmalade like the good sport she always was. Below the Bowles letter was a frayed address book from the early 1970s, which included Diana Ross and Benny Goodman. Below them, two yellowed copies of the New York Times had been stuffed inside. I paged through them as best I could, but none of the stories seemed relevant to Doralee, and I was scattering little bits of paper all over the cold carpet. Once I'd removed the newspapers, I saw that they served as a peculiar barrier. Hidden below them lay hundreds of mysterious gray envelopes, letters to Doralee sent from a Washington, D.C. address from someone called John Carter. When I tried to read one from October of 1934, about 6 years before Doralee met Dario, the handwriting crystallized, and the reason for hiding them became clear. Dear Doralee, by one of those last-minute flukes which makes reason real, I am to be accompanied on my next trip to New York. I don't think I've ever been so miserable in all my life, and I know you will be terribly hurt. On Thursday morning I shall telephone, and I may be able to find a way of seeing you. John's misery in being accompanied suggested that Doralee had been sleeping with a married man. What I or life can do with our love, John concluded, is still beyond my power to grasp. But it is still there, stronger than ever. The deeper I dug into the filing cabinet, the more letters from John I discovered, cascades of tormented love, ripe with melodramatic words like those Doralee had placed inside the mouths of her master lovers. I googled John Carter over and over, but it was too common a name to yield anything relevant until finding his full name, John Franklin Carter, scrawled in Doralee's hand on a manila envelope containing yet more letters, provided some basic details. A journalist and bureaucrat. He'd worked with FDR on the New Deal, then spied for him during the war. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Soon after discovering the Carter letters, I had found basic information about Carter in his obituary and short Wikipedia entry, journalist, FDR, etc. When I looked up Carter's name in the New York Times archive, I expected to discover more about himself and Roosevelt, but an alarming article emerged. To bring Hitlerism here, read the heading of the 1932 story. John Carter named in Berlin to head organizing of new party. Mr. Carter's appointment was revealed today, the article explained, when he gave out an interview accorded him in his capacity by Hermann Goering, the National Socialist chairman of the now-defunct Reichstag. Dorley's future lover had apparently been deputized by Goering to start a Hitlerist party to run in the 1932 election. Right before his Roosevelt days, John, to steal Sarah Palin's phrase from the 2008 election, was palling around with terrorists. It was after seeing Goering that Carter had first met Dorley on the Ile-de-France, sailing from France to New York. Though she confided in her adolescent diary that she thought she had gotten beyond the state during which I worshipped an old gentleman with whiskers, she contributed to the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in the Upper West Side as an adult, and buried her mother, husband, and sister in an Orthodox Jewish cemetery far out in Queens. Could she really have abided a man running for president against her beloved Roosevelt on an anti-Semitic platform? I felt dazed, jumbled, and Dorley had been a hairbreadth away from a history I'd never known existed. Apparently Putin was not the first of fascists to try to influence an American election. A man selected by one of Hitler's key henchmen to run against Roosevelt had seduced my suddenly inexplicable great aunt. How she loved powerful men. I thought of her master lover's depiction of Henry VIII, no monster, but a powerful, generous man with golden hair and beard, penetrating blue eyes, and a ruddy face. A few years before her future husband would come from Italy to escape the Holocaust, Dorley had apparently been in love with a Nazi sympathizer. If I looked harder in her apartment, would I have discovered another volume of Master Lovers featuring Hitler, Franco, Mussolini? If she'd lived further into the century, we might have read about Donald J. Trump with the magnificent orange hair, urging his followers to take off their masks and take over Congress before bathing in the nude with his dozens of doting porn stars. Back in Virginia, my mother was dying, but while died, I carried on to anyone who would listen to me about my great aunt and her married Hitlerist lover, spending my mother's last months back in the 30s, the decade of her childhood. It no longer surprised me so much that Dorley could have been so close with the Nazi sympathizers who dominated the music world after the war, like Elizabeth Schwarzkopf, Goebbels' star soprano, and probable mistress. When I think of Dorley's Judaism, I see her and her family climbing up the roof to escape a mob of angry Jews as if she was still running from them years later, or more metaphorically from a sense of Jewish identity. Not a proper researcher sifting through archives, I acted like an amateur fisherman randomly setting up rods. Convinced that Carter was too minor a figure to have archives, I allowed nearly a year to pass before stumbling upon their existence in Cheyenne at the University of Wyoming. I was busily planning what felt like an epic and exotic journey westward when the archive offered to scan everything relevant for a fraction of the cost. Amidst the material sent to me, I came across a letter John Carter wrote to the New Republic in 1937 that solved some of the mystery of his Hitlerist party and their quixotic run against FDR. Responding to I.F. Stone's claim that he had, quote, swung all the way from sympathy with Nazism to New Dealism, Carter asserted that his party, not at all Hitlerist, was actually encouraged by Roosevelt. Carter also explained that Edward Herriot, the French Prime Minister, had sent him to Germany to ascertain the future policy of the Nazis, and Frederick Burkle of the New York Times had asked him to interview Hitler while there. The future Fuhrer proving unavailable, he had met with Goering instead. Carter claimed that he had sent the ensuing interview to Burkle only to find it, quote, materially altered, that shocking article about Carter that I found in the Times. Also in the material from the Carter archive was a document mislabeled John Carter's Diary, 1932. For Sheila, read John's dedication to what turned out to be his wife's journal, in the hope that 1932 will be as happy as past years and more interesting than some years. Sheila unwittingly backed up John's claim to have been a Roosevelt supporter by announcing that she and her husband feel tired but more than happy after the election. But I was surprised by her animated description of early Nazi Germany. On September 5th in Munich, John sent his introduction to Ernst Hansfangl, Hitler's chief of press, who Sheila immediately refers to affectionately as Putzi. With Putzi, they attended a Hitler meeting, a large and enthusiastic crowd in a tightly closed building holding about 1,800. He was accompanied, she reports, by guards, flags, music, quite a good show. Then Putzi persuaded us to go to Berlin for the dissolution of the Reichstag. All Berlin, Sheila exclaims, feels electric over showdown in Reichstag, where all the traffic has been stopped, heavy police guards posted. Again and again, Sheila makes the American-educated Putzi sound like a pal with whom she was in chummy accord and presents the political environment in Germany as more thrilling than threatening. In 1937, just as Putzi was being removed from Hitler's inner circle by Goebbels, he wrote Carter a strange but friendly letter on official Reich stationery. Putzi suggested minor revisions to what he calls that dream interview with Goering. Putzi did not seriously object to an interview that the Times transformed into an apology for Hitlerism, so John probably painted a favorable portrait of Goering. Finally, Putzi requests that John and Sheila no longer refer to him as Putzi, but simply as Putz, which we know, what he is Yiddish slang for a dickish, generally worthless person. Where does this leave John's Hitlerism? Deputized to start a Nazi party, no, but probably sympathetic to the cause. Thank you so much.
Next up is Angela Starita. She writes about cities and architecture, and she's been in Exacting Clam as a columnist of Three Quarks Daily. Sure.
Very light. Okay, thanks everybody for coming out. This is a very old essay I wrote. It was published 19 years ago, and it's got, it cracked me up when I reread it because it's got a lot of old, dated references. It's called The Acropolis of Northern New Jersey, and I'm just reading parts of it. Years of commuting on the PATH train, years of commuting on the PATH train, the commuter specter of a subway running between New York and northern New Jersey, have given me plenty of time to consider what cartoonist Ben Catcher calls the pleasures of urban decay. While careering toward Jersey City, the train suddenly surfaces with sonic force to an industrial landscape covered in phragmites, brown grasses that look like toxic wheat. To the left is the massive Goyen pipe fitting and valve factory, an abandoned brick cathedral covered by rows of delicate glass windows, pale green and broken. Out the other window, the Pulaski Skyway, a raised road built in the 20s to shorten the trip between New York and Newark. It dips off to the right where the train crosses the Turnpike Bridge, a coal-black set of girders resembling an erector-set robot. The place is so improbable with its abandoned cranes and piers, whose function was probably known only to a select few. The spirit behind the factories and bridges, however dismal and decrepit now, was one of a grandiose idealism. Seeing them, I can't help but feel wonder at our force of will, what it must feel like, I guess, to arrive in Giza or Machu Picchu or maybe a post-war battlefield. What kind of person could dream up such schemes and then imagine them possible? Perhaps it's the outsized confidence of these plotters that impresses me as much as the structures themselves. Today's techno-dreamers, though, long for the minuscule, the counterintuitive, and the pleasurable notion that the compact is more powerful than the gargantuan. Transistors and microchips, slender fiber optic lines. These enthrall the same sorts of minds that brazenly design 20-ton steamrollers in under-one-roof manufacturing operations. The absurd capabilities of an average cell phone or Palm Pilot may be wondrous, but they can inspire or terrify like a steel mill. Those most passionate about the industrial landscape are the very people who have most shrunk that breathtaking scale to a low-tech whisper. They're part of a group that calls themselves the Society of Industrial Archaeologists. When I first thought of them, I thought the SIA must be somewhat, learned of them rather, I thought that the SIA must be a somewhat clandestine, low-rent operation, machine-loving wonks secretly referring to themselves as industrial archaeologists. I joined at once and was surprised when a packet of journals and newsletters arrived filled with articles that were not only coherent, but meticulously researched. They weren't Whitman-esque paeans to gargantuan power substations, yet in their dedication to things like cord and web members of truss bridges and tours of Ohio blast furnaces, the articles demonstrated an indisputable passion.
The SIA newsletter turned the inexplicable but sharp ache I feel each time I pass a refinery near Newark, the exact sensation brought on by an adolescent crush, into something I can name. To be exact, it's called the Bayway Refinery, the northernmost refinery on the East Coast, with the world's largest fluid catalytic cracking unit. It gets crude from the North Sea and West Africa and produces more home heating oil in the winter, more gasoline in the summer. That's to say, industrial archaeologists, beside their engineering smarts, have figured out how to blunt the pain of love by dissecting it, partitioning it into manageable, knowable pieces. SIA's newsletter, published quarterly, carries urgent announcements about the potential destruction of the last of the Great Lakes Hewlett unloaders, and news bits like this, quote, Zahir Khalid, owner of the CNH refinery in Lusk, Wyoming, writes that the refinery has been accepted to the National Register of Historic Places. Additionally, the Guinness Book of World Records has certified the CNH as the smallest oil refinery in the world. Unquote. The newsletter's bibliography doesn't claim to be exhaustive. A proviso in each edition reminds us that the bibliography, quote, is compiled from books and articles brought to our attention by you, the reader. If I were to create my fantasy SIA bibliography, it would certainly include, and I wrote about a number of books, but I'll cut to this one. It certainly will include Form and Fancy by Joan S. Skinner, a book dedicated to the 20th century British architect Thomas Wallace, who used Albert Kahn, the architect of the Ford factories in Detroit, Kahn's new concrete system to design what became known as the fancy factories, buildings with very ornate exteriors made of brightly colored fans over concrete. Skinner's interpretation of Wallace's garish exteriors takes SIA-ish fervor to a new height. She defends the fancy factories from critics who view them, quote, out of prejudice and superficiality of judgment that looks no further than the pretty face. The book is Skinner's dissertation, for the most part, it could only be recommended to serious concrete devotees. Yet I would refer industrial archaeologists to its pages for her overheated reading of Wallace's symbolic system of design elements. Noting the great influence of the discovery of King Tut's tomb on British architecture in general, and a Wallace-designed Firestone tire factory in particular, Skinner writes, mostly, in fact, the references here were Egyptian, despite the classical elements and the emphasis of the company identity in monogrammed shields. The detail and path and doorway announced the entrance to the temple of Amun-Ra. His ray burst forth in the fanlight in the bronze filigree of the doors and again above the round face of the clock, time being eternal as the diurnal progress of the sun. The wings of Horus, the son of Ra, the horns of Amun, and the Gothic F of Firestone are all contained within one motif at the base of the lamp standards. She sees even more Egyptian nobility in a vacuum cleaner factory. Quote, the vulture and the wedget snake together symbolize the protectors of the two lands of Egypt. This Egyptian symbolism comes closer to a representation of the close relationship between the Hoover vacuum cleaner parent and its first overseas base than, say, Thunderbird feathers worn by an Apache chief. Whatever Wallace's symbolic intention, his clients knew just what the buildings were meant for, Amun-Ra entrance hall or not. The tires and cars and vacuum cleaners that issue from their factories have dimension and weight if the fantastical exteriors, even if the fantastical exteriors give it very little sense of the rough-hewn world of the production going on inside. The items themselves may seem almost magically concocted, far removed from the actual workers and machines. We live in a kind of green card marriage with these products. They're in our homes, but we have no idea where they come from, and more deplorably, don't care to know. Industrial archaeologists want to right this injustice through a search for their stories, ones that usually start with one guy's good luck and end with a lot of other people's astoundingly bad luck. Look, for instance, to Eric Schlosser's Fast Food Nation to inflame your entrepreneurial heart in the first chapter. The Hardee's chain started as a 2-bit hot dog stand and terrify you in all the other chapters with the plight of Mexican slaughterhouse butchers, out-of-work ranchers, and McDonald's workers without insurance. But here perhaps a confession is in order. It's the Hardee's chapter I would run to first. I'm drawn in by the underdog making it big concept, the same appeal of another candidate for the bibliography, Robert Friedel's Zipper, an exploration in novelty from 1994. For the industrial archaeologist purposes, the story of the Zipper, with this obsessive inventor, competing patents, slick salesman, is a study of how such a pervasive, usually ignored technology became popular, what critic Siegfried Gideon referred to as anonymous history. Arguably, Friedel writes, the Zipper is the first machine that any of us encounters on a regular basis in our daily lives. He traces the Zipper's invention from an impossibly complex design to a workable one, largely due to the work of a lone machinist working in Hoboken. Though originally called a placket or hookless fastener, the Zipper got its name from the Goodrich Company, which made rubber galoshes called zippers that used the new metal fasteners instead of buttons. Eventually, the name was applied to the fasteners themselves, not just the boots. The best chapter of Zipper looks at how the hookless fastener became a metaphor for, among other things, loosening sexual mores. In Brave New World, Aldous Huxley equates zippers with impersonal mechanized sex, cataloging Lenina's zipper-laden garments, her zippy jammas and zippy cami nicks. Friedel finds other examples of zippers representing the convergence of sex and machinery in books by Tom Robbins, Erica Young, the movie Gilda, and even Lyndon Johnson's words of praise for his staff who didn't, quote, run around with their zippers open. The SIA also has its own magazine, and in it is a column by a man named Kurt Wobblers called Object Lessons. He covers stories on the passions of Henry Fulton and the history of the helmet. Last year, he described the unlikely advent of the stapler, the struggle of well-meaning inventors to find a workable system for loading staples, the true sticking point in modern stapler development. Along the way, the author lets slip the fact that the Hotchkiss stapler is known as the Hochikisu in Japan. Wahlber, intent on freeing us of our fixation with animate beings, does not shy away from descriptions of stapler technology because he knows why his readers care in the first place. True love requires information about the beloved, lots of it, so learning that the internal piece at the end of the stapler spring is called the follow block is hardly superfluous to those of us who want the answer to the big question: how does it all work? The bibliography undeniably traffics in nostalgia, and while that can go a long way in saving buildings that may be beautiful or edifying or valuable in a new capacity, it can deny the ugliness of manufacturing, particularly in a NAFTA GATT world. Every issue of the SIA newsletter offers several, sometimes many, labor-related titles in its bibliography. The Winter 2003 issue lists, among others, the second edition of Mary Louise Clifford and J. Candace Clifford's Women Who Kept the Lights, an illustrated history of female lighthouse keepers, and The Heat, Steelworker Lives and Legends, edited by Stacy James and Jimmy Santiago Baca. If industrial archaeologists want to know how the mechanisms of the world function, we have an even greater, if unspoken, fascination with the person who operates those machines and manages to live and work within that enormous scale. It's the size of factories that is most immediately impressive about them, but we can only measure them with regard to ourselves. They may not call themselves industrial archaeologists, but a growing number of people work to preserve and refurbish abandoned industrial sites, an arm of preservation that would have been unimaginable 40 years ago. In Manhattan, a recent contest solicited ideas, not necessarily practical ones, to rehab the High Line, an elevated track running from Greenwich Village to 34th Street that was used to deliver goods to and from factories and warehouses. The winner's works were exhibited at Grand Central Terminal last July. One winner called for a mile-long swimming pool. Another wants to see wildflowers take over the remaining tracks. The High Line district map only includes what it calls new, Penn Station, referring to plans to use the main post office as a new train station to make up for the demolition that set the American preservation movement in motion. Over in Jersey City, John Gomez, president of the Jersey City Landmarks Conservancy, rides his bike through those huge and largely off-limits industrial sites that are Hudson County's riches. The consummate industrial archaeologist, he climbs over gates and through broken windows to look close up at the guts of those forbidding buildings that we usually just see from the train. Through his efforts, a beautiful waterfront powerhouse was designated a national landmark though New Jersey had rejected it. He kept New Jersey Transit from quietly destroying a set of air shafts, and in a dramatic last-minute intervention, he and the Conservancy saved parts of an 1860s road factory that may have been a stop on the Underground Railroad from what seemed to be imminent destruction. Yet Gomez, who grew up near the powerhouse and is fascinated by its design, knows that the object of his affection contributed, like so many of the nearby industrial sites, to the area's pollution and a lot of misery for local residents. His own father, who inspected buildings, now fights lymphatic cancer, a disease Gomez worries was a result of his father's work. Still demolishing it all for new construction strikes him as erasure not just of buildings, but of so many personal histories. For him, industrial archaeology isn't about nostalgia, but memory. On the path line, Gomez has told me, there is a ghost station, a stop at 19th Street in Manhattan, that was closed in 1954. He has advised me to sit in the train's front car and stare hard to try to get a glimpse of it. Though I've never been quick enough to see a thing, I'm relieved to know it's there, untouched, a human-sized platform meant for people waiting on machines.
Okay, the bringing up the rear is Tyler C. Gore. He's the senior editor of Exacting Clam, and the bio that I'm about to read is obviously not written by me. His essays, stories, and reviews have appeared in many of the fine, high-quality journals preferred by discerning readers like you. He's the author of My Life of Crime, Essays and Other Entertainments, Sagging Meniscus, a delightful book that you should definitely buy. He lives as he dreams.
So I'm the last reader. I'm like 4 beers in now. So I just want to take this moment to thank all of the readers we had tonight. This was really great. So please, applause. And he won't like this, but I also want to thank Jacob Smullian, who is the publisher of Sagging Meniscus and Exacting Clam, and none of us would be here without Jacob. So a round of applause for Jacob. Jacob's going to be angry. So I'm Tyler Gore. And what I'm going to read for you tonight is an excerpt from the really long essay in my book called Appendix, which is kind of like a book inside of a book. And Appendix is this long, crazy 5-part essay that takes up 2/3 of the book. And it's mostly about my routine appendix surgery in 2016, but also a kind of portrait of my whole life, my anorexic cat, my marriage, my some strangely attractive hospital personnel, my thoughts about mortality, Kafka, the Matrix, and whether or not we live in a computer-simulated universe. And I'm going to read you a very short section of that just the background. We've already been through the emergency room where I got diagnosed with appendicitis, and now we're in NYU Hospital where we're waiting for them to take me into surgery. And some friends are there to see me and keep my wife company. I'm in the bed. I'm doped up on painkillers, and they are standing around the room waiting for the surgeon to come. And the last thing you should know is that my wife, Lee, her real first name is Natasha, and that is how I refer to her in the story. So here we go. So I'm a social person, and I felt the need to entertain my visitors. I had never entertained guests from a hospital bed, and I found it awkward. I didn't know what was expected socially in my situation, but I did my best to be charming under the circumstances. I thanked everybody for coming to my operation. Some lame attempts at gallows humor. I'd like you to know that none of you are currently mentioned in my will, but that could change. Ugh. It was hard to be a good host in bed while my guests towered over me in customary adult verticality, and exhausting to generate a stream of witty banter while slipping in and out of consciousness mid-sentence like a junkie on the nod, later waking up to realize that the clever remark I'd formulated was for a conversation that had moved on without me some time ago. An additional challenge was that Natasha kept interrupting my urbane monologues to point out that I had once again kicked off my sheets and my junk was hanging out of my gown on full display. I don't care, I said defiantly. This was true. I know, she said, pulling up the sheet, but have some consideration for other people. No one wants to see that. Within minutes, I'd twist and squirm and kick the sheet off again. My brain may have been numbed by pharmaceuticals, but my body knew that I was actually in agonizing pain and thrashed about accordingly. All I knew was that it felt good to squirm, and I didn't care if everyone got an eyeful of my floppy bits, because I had discovered a secret long known to heroin addicts throughout the world. Narcotics don't just remove pain, they remove shame. At last I understood why junkies were capable of such astonishing things. Liberated from a sense of shame, you were free to do as you pleased. You could take a nap on the floor of a Toys R Us, or take a shit on the sidewalk. The world was your oyster. In retrospect, my overall impression is that in spite of my compromised circumstances, I was nonetheless very charming indeed. That impression is, of course, dubious. The record of my memory has numerous lapses, but also inexplicable artifacts. For example, I have a distinct memory of the three of them, Natasha, Sean, Sylvia, sitting on the edge of my bed eating noodles out of Chinese takeout containers. You don't forget something like that. I even remember feeling sorry for them. It seemed so dreadfully unappetizing to have to eat dinner right next to my unwashed feet and in full view of my exposed nethers. That never happened, Natasha said when I mentioned it later. But I know it did. I distinctly recall Sylvia dropping one of her chopsticks on the floor and saying, "Oh shit." And then I said, "Oh, just wipe it off. I mean, what could be possibly cleaner than a hospital floor?" Now that's a pretty good line. You don't just make up something like that out of thin air. You have to have actually witnessed someone eating noodles on the end of your hospital bed and dropping a chopstick on the floor. Natasha disputes this. We absolutely did not eat noodles on your hospital bed. That's disgusting. Why would we do that? And it's true. Why would they? They could have gone outside to the waiting room to eat their noodles. And I can't think of why Natasha would lie about this unless she's simply ashamed. I mean, I certainly would be. But if they didn't eat Chinese noodles on the end of my bed, then who did? Thank you very much. Thank you guys all for coming. And I would like to say that there are several authors here with books for sale, so if you'd like any books signed, I'm sure they will be happy to do it. Thank you.